like to ask you 6 questions, and you could tell me if they're related, or you can answer whichever one you want. You could tell me if there's a relation between all 6 of these questions. Question 1 is, in 1860, the average age of the onset of puberty in girls was 16.6 years. In 1920, it was 14.6. In 1950, 13.1. 1980, 12.5, 12 and a half years old. And in 2010, it had dropped to 10 and a half years old. That was from 16.6, 16 and a half years old in 1860 to 10 and a half in 2010. Similar sets of figures have been reported for boys, albeit with a delay of around a year. So what is causing the earlier age of the onset of puberty? That's question 1. Question 2 is, I heard Stephanie Senoff from MIT say that 1 out of 2 children would have autism by 2032. Now, it's possible that she's updated this statement since I read it, but she said that, and I guess so that's the second question. What's that based on? Third question is, the first global assessment of pollinators ever has found that extinction pressures on species that facilitate crop production are threatening the world's food supply, with hundreds of billions of dollars worth of food and agricultural production annually at stake. Fourth question is, sperm counts have dropped over 50% since 1973, according to the New York Times. And fifth question, is it true that the FDA has only banned 7 out of 80,000 chemicals introduced? And I'll add a sixth question, is it true that only 1 in 4 food samples tested contain 0 pesticides, meaning that 3 out of 4 food samples contain 0 pesticides? So to repeat, the first one was about puberty, the second one was about pollinators, the third was about autism, the fourth was about sperm counts, the fifth was about only 7 out of 80,000 chemicals introduced ever being banned, and the sixth was that 3 out of 4 food samples had 0 pesticides. Answer whatever you want from that and tell me if there's a relation of why all these things are happening. Your thoughts?
I could answer 3 of them in one go. The answer is, number one, let's start with the residues in food samples, and that less than a quarter have no residues. The reason I will say that is false is because when all the testing I've seen, no government or anyone has tested for every pesticide used. They only test for a sample of the thousands that are approved, and they don't test also for the breakdown products that can be more toxic. So, for instance, to give you an example, here in the US, the most common pesticide used is glyphosate, but at this stage, not one official testing has ever tested for glyphosate. So to say that 25% of samples do not have pesticides when you do not test for all the samples and some of the most common ones means that's not true. You've got no evidence that those 25% don't have any testing. And when the USDA started the testing, they found so much glyphosate they could not find a sample without it. They stopped testing and didn't want to publish it. So the fact is, where we take these samples to independent labs and start to test them, and also test them not at parts per million, but at the real rates that affect us, parts per billion and parts per trillion, we find every sample has not just one, but multiple pesticides. So, firstly, then we talk about the age of puberty in girls and also the falling sperm counts. They are all related to the same issue that we know of over 800 chemicals that when they go to very low levels, parts per billion and parts per trillion, they start to act like hormones. Part per trillion is the equivalent of 1 drop of water in 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools. And many of these chemicals act like synthetic estrogens. And what that is doing is causing girls to reach puberty earlier because they're actually being exposed to excess estrogen from the time they are conceived all through their life. And where this is a real concern, we know there is a relationship between the onset of breast cancer, between increase in breast cancer and early onset of puberty. The earlier a girl reaches puberty, the more likely her chances are of breast cancer. And the fact is that 80% of breast cancers are what we call estrogen sensitive. Estrogen increases it. Similarly, the fact that boys are being exposed to excess estrogen is affecting their development. We're finding higher levels of boys being born with urinary genital tract deformities, a whole range of them. And we know also that this is also affecting their sperm counts, but not just the drop in sperm counts, but the quality of the sperm, the motility, there's more sperm deformities. This is a real issue in terms of not just falling reproduction, but in terms of birth defects in children. And we also know that these same chemicals are responsible for the increase in cancers of the sexual tissues, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, cervical cancer, endometrial cancer, and in men, prostate and testicular cancer.
Adding to that, and thank you for that, Andre, the falling rates of puberty, and I mean not only, and that's a dramatic dropping rate of early puberty hitting girls. Not only do they have a higher risk of breast cancer, but multiple social problems and difficulties hitting puberty so early. And there's a wonderful report about it that I wanted to mention that was done by a scientist called Sandra Steingraber. She's a wonderful scientist. The report is, difficult, like a lot of this information, but she looked at all the factors contributing to early puberty, and there are multiple factors: sedentary lifestyles, not just pesticides or direct chemical exposures in the home of the endocrine disruptors, but also polluted communities seem to be harder hit, as always with these issues. The communities where they're making the chemicals or running the factories are dealing with the worst health and environmental problems, and they're often communities of color. So early puberty is a huge problem, and the dropping sperm counts is stunning how the numbers on that. In fact, they changed the numbers so it doesn't look so stunning. But they have actually, what does dropping mean? But there was a study recently in the Journal of American Medical Association, JAMA. And I was shocked by this because it's a leading medical journal in the US, so it's really the gold standard according to a lot of doctors. And there was a commentary in there by Philip Landrigan from Mount Sinai who said there are multiple lines of evidence that pesticides in food are leading to all sorts of fertility problems, and that his advice to doctors is to tell your patients to eat organic. And there was a study also in the journal. It was a small study done by Harvard researchers where they looked at, they studied women undergoing IVF, in vitro fertilization. So they were having trouble getting pregnant. And they put some of them on an organic diet and some of them ate conventional food. And they reported that there was a higher rate of pregnancy loss among the women who were eating a conventional diet. And that organics seemed to matter in terms of them having successful fertility treatments. And the doctors who did that, he said he was really surprised. He was not expecting the results to be that way. And a reporter asked him, would you change anything now about your own behavior? He said, I might be more willing to eat an organic apple. So the information is in the mainstream, and I think that's really good news and important to show how strong the evidence actually is. Another of the questions was about the EPA banning chemicals. I thought it was 5, not 7, but maybe it's updated. But 5 classes of chemicals have been banned, and I mentioned they were unable to ban asbestos. But that's under the industrial chemical laws, and pesticides are regulated somewhat differently, so it's easier to get pesticides regulated and banned, and we were about to ban chlorpyrifos, but the Trump administration stopped that, which happened to be after Dow gave $1 million to the inauguration.
Can I just want to say one other thing about falling sperm counts in organic food. There was a study done in Denmark. They thought if pesticides are the cause, they wanted to look at a group of men who weren't exposed to pesticides. So they got a whole lot of Danish organic farmers to volunteer to give sperm samples, and their sperm samples were the same as their grandfathers, the equivalent of the 1930s. So that, I think, is really important evidence to put across that there is good evidence that it's pesticides, and there's also good evidence that by going on an organic diet and avoiding them, we can get sperm samples back, sperm levels back to the way they should be. And this is very important for the health of our civilization. What sort of civilization allows, our reproduction to be so damaged as it is now, and particularly when we have good science that we can turn it around in weeks, even days?